Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Season 3 of the Fanfiction Tapes. I'm your host today, Maya, pronouns she, her, and today I'm joined by...
Elizabeth. I am the guest. My pronouns are she, her.
And I am our producer, Ian. Pronouns he, him.
Today's episode is about storytelling in music. Believe it or not, stories aren't just told through the words that we use or the expressions put on screen. There's a lot that goes on that we don't always even know is happening. Many of you are probably familiar with the fact that many movies, TV shows, and general other things have soundtracks to them.
Is to say underscoring in the sort of old-fashioned Hollywood sense, and or like songs that are used for the to sort of heighten the mood or accentuate a scene or as part of the sound fabric of the actual scene itself sometimes.
Actually, is that where like calling it a score comes from? Underscoring?
It is indeed.
Neat.
Maya, you are one of today's lucky 10,000.
I'm like one of today's lucky 10,000 a couple times over already.
Yeah, we did have a pretty substantial discussion before we started recording. Hopefully some of that'll translate to the podcast itself.
Yeah, I am a lot more of kind of an amateur with this. I played music in high school. I can kind of read sheet music. Don't have a particularly great ear for stuff.
That's okay. That's why you brought me on.
Yep. I'd remembered your posts about the music you wrote, and when this episode was kind of being thought of, I went, oh, definitely know who I should ask.
But yeah, let's launch into it. So soundtracks, like you said, they're like I think like there's a distinction between just sort of like soundtracks aren't the only thing we'll discuss this episode probably, but I think they're just sort of they're the first thing that I thought of when this episode's discussion topic was proposed. Like, how is storytelling conveyed through the music of a story, or just through music like by itself, and how do storytelling and music intersect?
Yeah, my kind of experience with that is mostly with the way like soundtracks are used in video games, which is a little different from probably what you're familiar with, because there aren't quite like comprehensive songs like what you would get in a movie even.
Right, because it has to function
within
more
an interactive
atmospherically.
world.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then some games that's more true than it is for others. But there's, I remember seeing stuff about the way the Doom soundtrack was made. Where there's certain, environmental cues that trigger different amounts of music. And I don't notice it much when I'm playing a game and I'm listening to the music. Sometimes I have, a couple songs that are stuck in my head, and so I'm going to play them and shut off the soundtrack to the game. I want to listen to those songs, but I'll notice that I won't really get as into the game. I won't feel as strongly what I'm supposed to when the music's off.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times in video games, they'll do things with the music where layers will come in and out and sections will start and stop dynamically. I think that happens with like the boss music in Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. And particularly, it is something that happens in Doom and Doom Eternal. Depending on, the level of action that you are doing, Mick Gordon's soundtrack will actually dynamically bring in more layers, make the music more energetic, more hype, and then when the action is cooling off, it'll bring it back down.
Yeah, that is, as I understand it, pretty commonplace, and that's why you get the phrases like, "Why am I hearing boss music right now?" And things like memes, because of the association of certain types of music with boss fights and having and time.
That is quite literally, it's storytelling through music. It's not. It's sort of. It's the presaging, or the sort of the underscoring, the emphasis, the pre-emphasis or the post-emphasis of the sort of the storyline through the musical content.
And like you mentioned earlier, Maya, sometimes, a lot of the time, it's something that you're not really conscious of necessarily, unless you go to unless something brings it specifically to your attention, like playing through a section with an alternate soundtrack that you're providing yourself, and you'll notice something feels off. Oh, it's the music. And this is a really interesting and probably one of the more obvious examples of, like, I think it's called like side channeling or back channeling. It's something from communication theory about all of the ways that people communicate other than directly speaking.
Yeah, that was mentioned in my public speaking class. Unfortunately, I didn't pay any attention.
Rip.
But yeah, music is a very good way to tie in emotional cues in the story.
It can be a potent tool for doing that, as well as, I would say, in some cases, as well as like communicating like relationships between certain elements of the story, and just sort of thematic things even sometimes, but that relies on sort of, you're getting into like, it's not quite intertextuality because it's the same text, but it's like associations within the text, within the musical components of the text, the text broadly speaking. And there's some of that stuff in Star Wars, for instance, and we'll get to that. But do you want to start with, like, do you guys want to talk about Ruby first? Because, like, that's a topic that's pretty familiar to most of our listeners. A lot of them, anyway.
Yeah, probably a good chunk of our listeners, since this was originally started out of a Ruby server and is how, well, at least the three of us here now met.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine there are people, I don't know how many people are necessarily aware of this, but I feel like it's relatively well known within the Ruby fandom that at least the vast majority of the Ruby soundtrack, kind of, except for portions of Volume 9, like at least 1 through 8, makes heavy use of what are called leitmotifs. And it's sort of, in this case, it's sort of an interconnected network of melodic and harmonic themes that are attached to either characters or concepts or ideas or like sort of story components. Like, for example, Ruby Rose has a theme or two. Like Wei Shni has a theme. And like it's pretty like heavily illustrated in like the color trailers, for instance. They're like the musical components of those eventually translated into like the leitmotifs of Ruby, Weiss, Blake, and Yang, respectively.
That little red like roses melody.
Right.
Dee,
Yeah.
dee, dee, dee.
Although there's also there's the da 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 da, like that's a theme for Ruby, but then there's also like another theme that sort of like a descending like da 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 is sort of it's like a descending line that is also sort of associated with Ruby that's used throughout the soundtrack. And I would say from what I gather, it might even be used more than the da 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 sort of.
Yeah, that one I don't think is too common. From what I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, it's the descending line is a little bit more, but anyway, you hear stuff like that in the Ruby soundtrack, and it's sort of used to underscore moments, lots of different moments, and to sort of it's the raw material out of which a lot of the musical texture of the soundtrack is sort of built, sort of using like where Ruby gets, for example, where Ruby gets like a focus scene, like maybe you'll hear her theme interwoven with like another theme sort of about like the another component of the soundtrack.
If I can make an analogy, it's
Go ahead.
kind of like specifically colored building blocks almost. Because of
In
course
a
my
sense,
mind goes
yeah.
straight to Legos. Right.
Right.
You construct the music out of these blocks, and certain colors are associated with certain characters.
Right.
And they're not necessarily the whole of the piece. There can be other
Yeah.
parts that aren't necessarily tied in certain
It's like
ways.
connecting tissues.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say a lot of the Ruby soundtrack makes use of this, at least the parts that like Jeff Williams and Alex Abraham were in charge of. That's why I'm kind of excluding Volume 9, even though that does kind of still make use of soundtrack because of I don't know, it's
The
not
change in
entirely
artistic
clear.
direction.
Yeah. And I mean Volume 9's weird anyway, so it's like
Yeah.
it makes sense. But
Yes.
in any case though, Ruby is an interesting case because like it's not only like the underscoring, the score itself that makes use of these, it's also the songs, the insert songs, the theme songs, the end credits songs for like the last episode of each volume, that sometimes make use of these. For example, you'll have like, well, the color trailers are the first and most instantly obvious sort of example of this. Like the themes are derived from the songs, but then you have stuff like Bad Luck Charm, which is a song from Crow's perspective, and the leitmotif of Crow is essentially integrated into the chorus of Bad Luck Charm. I think the leitmotif preceded the song, so it's more a case of the song making use of the motif rather than the motif being derived from the song. But it's another sort of way to sort of interlink all these different components, and I think it's pretty cool.
The color trailers are almost a case of Monty decided to make some AMVs for his OCs.
Yeah, I mean, like AMVs are pretty damn cool. Let's be real. AMVs can be very fun, and
I mean, that was my early music taste, was watching AMVs that were just commercials for toys that I liked with early 2000s music.
I mean, I guess the immediate example is like Linkin Park. At least that's what comes to mind. Linkin Park AMVs, absolutely classic.
Oh yeah,
But it's interesting. I think there's ways in which leitmotifs are used in Ruby, and not just in Ruby, but in like other look at like Star Wars, for instance. Like there's like connections between leitmotifs which signify, which signal or subliminally signal like connections between characters or themes. I'm trying to think of. Oh yeah, it's Yang's and Raven's theme, for instance. Like Raven's four note motif being a sort of a distorted version of the I Burn chorus, like where the I Burn chorus is da 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 da. Raven's leitmotif is da 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 da, with like the last note a half a step higher.
Yeah.
It's essentially signaling the familial relationship, as well as perhaps the more consonant nature of Yang's psyche versus the more dissonant, tortured aspect of Raven's.
Yang is a more optimistic person, and Raven is a little more pessimistic, and so
at least at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah.
Yang doesn't necessarily stay that sunny throughout, but yeah, there's stuff like that. There's oh gosh, do we want to delve into Star Wars? Because one of these examples is
Sure, go
I
ahead.
would say a pretty classic example, or not pretty classic because it's not. I don't know if it's not that classic, but it's the example of how like the end of Anakin's theme from the Phantom Menace is essentially the last bit of the Imperial March. I can't remember. It's like there's like the da 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 da, like that. It's like Anakin's theme is relatively legato.
That's they use that melody softer and slowed down.
Well, it's not really that. It's just the ending tag is on both.
Yeah.
Like it's a different melody, but it's essentially like it signifies that like Anakin is going to give rise to the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember particularly noticing that when I was younger.
Yeah, and I love that sort of like intertwining of melodic motifs. And then, of course, I would
also like to point out on the concept of intertwining motifs in Star Wars. Okay, so obviously 4 through 6 were the first movies to come out way back in the 70s. And in those you have the Skywalker theme.
Da, 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 da. Oh no, that's the Force theme.
Which is usually, that is what I'm thinking of.
Oh really?
But played slow on a solo horn. Dun,
Binary Sunsets.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, dun,
Note,
dun, dun, dun,
and then and that's the exact same instrumentation that gets used to transform the Imperial March into Anakin's theme in the prequels.
Interesting.
Funny,
right?
That.
Yeah,
you take that Imperial March melody, dun 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 dun, and then you take it and you play that slowly on a solo horn, and it becomes Anakin's theme, but it's also tied to the Force theme because it's the same instrument, the same timbre.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but it's that sort of like combining of two aspects that's really interesting.
And this is why John Williams has so many Academy Awards.
Well, yeah, it's part of it. He's, from what I understand, he like took a lot of inspiration from like early Hollywood. I mean, he uses leitmotif in a lot of his works, from what I understand. But he took inspiration from a lot of like early Hollywood composers like Erich von Korngold, who themselves took inspiration from the work of Richard Wagner, and he was the first sort of composer to sort of codify the concept of the leitmotif, the theme attached to a character or a concept or an idea, and building the musical texture out of that to accentuate the dramatic beats of, in his case, a series of operas. the ring
Oh,
cycle.
Jaws.
notably.
Jaws is another good example of John Williams using leitmotif.
Yep.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. It's become essentially like a stock and trade of a lot of film composers these days because of its effectiveness, I'd say. I mean, I guess it can become overused, and it kind of also the use of this device, it kind of also conveys, at least to me, a sort of heightened, like Hollywoody kind of tone to things, as opposed to like a more grounded, realistic, like a quote, a realism in quotes kind of cinematic style, if that makes sense. Like where the emphasis is focused on like more diegetic music or like popular music on the soundtrack, as opposed to like an underscore of like orchestra or like ensemble or whatever.
Well, you mentioned a term just now that probably most of our audience isn't super familiar with, and was also something that you wanted to get into. And you said diegetic music.
All right, yeah, diegetic music. There's a distinction between. So the diegesis is what happens within the concept, within the framework, within the conceit of the story or the world or the narrative itself. The non-diegetic things are like the underscore of a movie. Like if it's like, for example, there's not an orchestra playing in space when Luke goes down the trench in A New Hope, but like, but that's non-diegetic. It's not actually happening within the world of the movie. It's happening for our benefit. It's outside the concept of the thing, but within that same movie, there is diegetic music because they go into the Mos Eisley Cantina, there's a band playing, and there's music coming from that band, and it's within the world of the scene, within the narrative. The Cantina band is playing music, and that's the music we hear. So that's diegetic music. Like, for example, like if, I don't know, I'm thinking of like the first Tim Burton Batman film, like when the Joker is like going down the staircase with his boombox on his shoulder. I don't know why that's the first example that came to mind, but he's in the museum and he's playing. I think it's like Huey Lewis in the News or some shit, or maybe I'm thinking American Psycho. That's also diegetic music, but it's like they're playing these recorded music things in the concept of the narrative. It's not like outside the concept of the narrative.
Back to the Future as well has some of that.
Right. There's like the distinction in that one is like the diegetic music is like in the Under the Sea dance prom thing, for example, where Marty McFly plays Johnny Be Good on whatever, or he plays fucking Van Halen or some shit.
One of my favorite sound design tricks is when non-diegetic music shifts into becoming diegetic music.
Oh yeah, it can be really interesting.
And there's an example of this in Ruby, right at the beginning of
the very
episode
first
1.
Wait a sec, I feel like I've forgotten this.
The music that's playing over the scene after
right.
the narration, as Roman and his goons are walking into the Death Store to rob it, and then we come to Ruby in the back, and she's got her headphones on, and she takes the headphones off, and it turns out the music's coming from her headphones. Right,
but then the music keeps going as she's like murking those bitches.
She clicks it off.
Oh, that's true. Gosh. I was confusing stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's sort of, I feel like that can be, diegetic music can serve a lot of like interesting sort of storytelling purposes. Although I can't quite rustle up them in my head right now.
Well, for one, it's kind of a cool moment for the audience of like.
Oh wait,
especially. Oops, sorry. Go on.
No. Go ahead. I'll wait.
I was gonna say, especially when you do like what Ian just mentioned with Ruby, of where you have kind of this shift in crossing almost the fourth wall,
Right.
That's kind of a neat moment and can pull the audience in a little bit.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh my god. I just thought of a great example. There's a film. Have either of you seen the film Portrait of a Lady on Fire?
I have not.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is a French film from like 2019. It is unbelievably gay. Well, it's a period drama, but it's like it has only diegetic music. There's barely any music in the film, but what role it does play is quite integral to the story. There's a piece by I believe it's the third movement of the second concerto in Antonio Vivaldi's Four Seasons concertos. It's the of the summer concerto. It's like the and there's a scene where one of the characters plays it for the other on a spinet. It's like a little harpsichord. And she essentially like it's a sort of a symbol of like within the scene it's sort of used as a means of bringing in the outside world to this sort of secluded, cloistered off place, but then it also kind of becomes essentially it acquires the significance of being the piece that character she doesn't totally play. She sort of half plays it, and she's like, I'm not good enough to play the rest of this because it has a lot of very fast scales and runs and stuff because it's a concerto for violin, so it's like virtuosic. But this is kind of a spoiler for the movie. I mean, you'll probably forget it, but like, so please don't remember this. But for the podcast's sake, at the very, very end of the movie, it comes back because the both of them are at a concert, like years later, and they see each other, or one of them sees the other, and that music is what is being played on stage as like the actual concerto. It's not just on a spinet. It's like by actual like an orchestra, and it causes an intense emotional reaction in both the character and the audience, hopefully. And I think that's just a gorgeous storytelling moment through music. And it's kind of, just watch the film. You'll see what I mean. But it's a gorgeous storytelling moment through diegetic music. There's no non-diegetic music in the film at all. There's just those two instances of that piece, and then there's like something that's sung by like a group of people. But I think the sparingness of it makes the use of music as storytelling device all the more powerful.
Tactical music strike.
Well, on the subject of diegetic music and things that might blur the line on whether music is in the world or not, I'm sure a lot of people might immediately jump to musicals when they hear about storytelling in music.
A lot of musicals have music that is non-diegetic, even though like the characters are singing them, but like they're not like they're singing them, but they're not singing within the narrative. It's sort of like song for our benefit. But then you have stuff like Chicago and Cabaret, where the music is diegetic. The music is actually happening. I don't know is Chicago like that? Well, I know Cabaret is. Cabaret is one where it's like all the music is diegetic. It's actually being sung within.
Yeah, that one. I if I remember correctly, that's a framing device of it's actually a show about a place where things are being performed.
Right. I think a chorus line is also, I mean,
Mhm.
has some aspects of that too, but I'm not entirely sure. I haven't seen a chorus line. But then you take
I
something like Oklahoma, like there, except for like there's like a dance scene. I don't think there's. I don't think any of the songs in Oklahoma, for instance, are actually being sung within like the proper narrative of the show itself. But but they're being used to convey emotion and character beats and drama.
Yeah, I don't actually I don't know if I've really watched many musicals. The only one that's coming to mind at the moment is Rocky Horror Picture Show,
Mm-hmm.
which I've seen once before.
Fair enough. I'm not like a huge musical theater nerd, but I do have some experience with them.
Yeah, I mean honestly that one I think is just a bad example of trying to figure out what's going on because it's just kind of weird. So I was trying to think
Yeah.
of okay,
It's a 70s musical. They can get weird.
is Beetlejuice a musical?
Well, they made a Beetlejuice musical like relatively recently, but the original Beetlejuice I don't think is a musical.
No, I don't think it is.
Like there are some things that sort of like they kind of cross they straddle the line. Like a lot of music biopics, like they'll use the the music as like a storytelling device, but not but it's because the music is the part of the story, you kind of it's sort of, I don't know, it's part of the story. It's it's necessarily part of the story, but it's also like used for it's also used in such a way that it accentuates various emotional beats. Like you think of I guess I haven't, oh god, I'm trying to think. I haven't actually seen that many musical biopics, but they're definitely like used in that way.
The emotions heighten until you can no longer contain them with dialogue alone, and then you break into song.
Right. It's
That's
like the
basically
whole like when you have when talking is not enough, you sing, and then when singing isn't enough, you dance. It's a sort of like old aphorism
Yeah.
for musical theater.
That's what I was trying to remember.
Huh.
I'm blanking on any examples of this, but I know I've seen them. On occasion, you will have like more modern, like comic musicals where a character will hang a lampshade on whether or not the music and choreography is actually happening.
Whether it's diegetic,
Like-
that is.
Yeah.
I think like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer musical episode. I think it's called Once More with Feeling. I haven't seen Buffy, but like I am somewhat familiar with the episode Once More with Feeling. Because apparently there's like a curse that forces everyone to sing. So it's essentially like it's a it's a diegetic musical episode. So it's
Huh.
it's like a supernatural curse that they have to like lift by the end of the episode, but like it forces the music into the diegetic realm.
Yeah, once again, I'm kind of out of my depth here with regards to musicals because,
That's fair. It's okay.
I mean, I guess really the closest thing to musicals that I've seen with anything approaching regularity, although even that is not particularly regular, is Disney movies because they tend to be somewhat musical.
They are musicals. Like Disney Renaissance, like the classic Disney Renaissance, most modern like Disney movies, animated movies, and even like the live action stuff like Mary Poppins. Those are musicals. Like,
oh, I've seen that one.
yep. But yeah, like like the classic ones like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. That's a musical. Like The Little Mermaid is a musical, even though they're animated. Like it is a musical. It has like classic musical theater conventions. It's storytelling through music. There's like the I want song and the I am song, and the sort of way in which a lot of songs can be like categorized into those sort of things as means of moving the drama forward.
Speaking of I want songs, we kind of talked a little bit last episode about villain songs. We've mentioned that we were going to have to bring that up again.
Yeah, Brian mentioned on the Shakespeare episode, he brought up the topic of soliloquy, which is a convention in non-musical theater where a character will stand alone on stage and speak to the audience about basically what they're thinking about. Because, you know, in theater and also in modern cinema and television, you know, you see the action that's happening.
Right, but you can't see inside the character's head.
Exactly.
So it's a means of essentially conveying what is inside the character's head. Unless you have like a voiceover, but you can't really do that in live theater very well. But musical numbers in musicals they can be a very effective way of conveying that information which is inside a character's head, but is not necessarily expressible or expressed through words. And a musical number can be very, I would say, relatively neatly mapped onto perhaps a soliloquy, at least when it's like one person, one character doing it, soliloquy. And then you have like duets, which can be like dialogue scenes.
Sometimes even when it's not necessarily one character alone.
Right.
Like, I would say that, like, for instance, Be Prepared from The Lion King serves pretty well as a Scar soliloquy.
Yeah.
Even though the hyenas are
For
there,
sure.
they're there in like the same sort of role as, like, say, a Greek chorus.
Yeah.
The song is it's you know, it's a classic example of a villain song, and he's telling the audience what he's going to do, why he's doing it, what he wants.
And I mean, with respect to what was mentioned last episode, that's also, these are characters that are kind of allowed to have that information anyways. They're his minions.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's like, I guess there's a diegetic reason for that to happen, even if the song itself isn't necessarily diegetic. Like the song, it's happening, but it's not happening within the narrow conceit of the narrative. And I don't know. Do you want to? No, I have a couple ideas. Well, I think we might be able to loop this back around to Ruby, because Ruby is in the sort of perhaps somewhat unique position of being what some might consider a non-diegetic musical. Or it's a non-diegetic musical. It's a musical where the music is not being the songs are sort of. It's interesting to say non-diegetic musical, because a lot of musicals, the music is non-diegetic, but the musical aspect of it is like further abstracted, because like the insert songs are being sung from the perspective of the characters, but they're not being sung by, for example, Ruby or Salem or Crow or something like that. They're being sung usually by Casey Lee Williams, or in some instances Caleb Hyles or Jeff Williams or gosh, Don M. Bennett, or, you know.
It's it's non-diegetic squared.
In a way, it's hard to really come up with a term that really encompasses the kind of, it's 1 degree further removed from the action, but it's still like for example, the song War in Volume 7, for instance, like that is effectively expressing the emotions and intentions of the Aesop's versus Team Ruby in that sort of battle scene that they have in, I can't remember which episode, but it's towards the end of volume 7. And there's sort of, the intentions are there. It's just that there's not, it's not, the characters aren't actually singing it. It's as if the characters are singing it. And I think that's kind of already kind of, that also draws on some like anime, like, and film traditions. Like, I'm thinking of, like, for example, Kill la Kill, where you have the song Before My Body Is Dry, which is the one that goes, don't lose your way. If anyone knows that.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, that one. But it's essentially like, the singer, I don't know her name, but she is essentially singing from the perspective of the protagonist, Ryuko. And there's like a rap verse, which is not, it's from the perspective of Senketsu, the sort of, he's like the alien, like life fiber cloth being Kamui thing. But their songs as if they were sung by the characters, even though they're not actually sung by the characters. They're just on the soundtrack. They're just in the background, underscoring the action.
The performer on Before My Body Is Dry is, according to Wikipedia, Mika Kobayashi.
Hey! Okay. Thank you for looking that up. But yeah, that was the instance that came to mind.
Once again, Ruby does also have examples of this crossing the line from non-diegetic to diegetic, because there are 2 of those character viewpoint songs that are explicitly shown to be performed by the character at some point. And those
one
are
of them
Mirror, Mirror,
yeah,
and This Life Is Mine.
Right. Well, Mirror, Mirror is
the latter?
Twice, because it appears in Ice Queendom.
Yeah, Mirror, Mirror is in Ice Queendom and also in the White Trailer, and This Life Is Mine is in Volume 5.
Right. Because Weiss is canonically a singer.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the one that was happening in Volume 5, right?
Something that people tend to forget. For some reason. I don't know why.
Which, when you also consider that the songs are actually sung by Casey Lee Williams.
Right.
Along with all of the other songs, pretty much. The majority of the Viewpoint character songs are sung by Casey Lee Williams, including Red Like Roses, which plays over, as I mentioned before, Roman and the goons heading into the dust shop before being shown to be playing through Ruby's headphones. Which brings up the question.
Is Weiss singing Red Like Roses?
Clearly,
Probably
Ruby
not.
is a Weiss fan.
Probably not. I think that is an interesting subject, and that can probably be debated at length by weird super fans of Ruby. But it is an interesting case where, like, you have the diegesis and the non-diegesis sort of crossing over in strange ways. So what other stuff do you guys want to talk about? There's a couple other things that I want to bring up, but I don't want to, like, make us go too long.
I mean, we kind of opened the episode with the limited area that I know much of anything about.
We've kind of run off the end of everything that I had put down as bullet points on the script. So if you want to go off on something, we've still got a little bit of time.
Yeah, there's a couple. I don't know. There's one thing I've been thinking about for a while. For about, I don't know, 8 months now or so, I've been a little bit obsessed with the anime Turn A Gundam, which is the 1999 installment of the Mobile Suit Gundam franchise, anime franchise. Notably, in this case, it was scored by Yoko Kanno, and there's techniques that she uses in the score that I kind of want to just briefly touch on, because I've been thinking about them in the context of musical storytelling ever since this episode idea was first proposed to me as and suggested that I be on it. There's a couple of things which kind of there are a few little relations within the various tracks of the soundtrack which I find really interesting, and they're sort of kind of like one of them is kind of a lore. It's music as lore, melody as lore. So there's this melody which we hear in its first incarnation as sort of like a primitive kind of, I guess you could say, tribal arrangement, which is sort of a it's sort of the music of a group of characters which are on the earth. Essentially, so there's the earth and the moon, and there's people on both, because this is sort of like a far future thing. But there's people on the earth whose ancestors came from the moon. Of course, everyone came from the earth initially, but like they came back to the earth from the moon.
Genetically relevant ancestors.
The closer ancestors are from the moon. Like they can like actually like they can like trace their lineage back to the moon. Like, oh yeah, like our great grandfather came from the moon, kind of thing. But there's this melody that appears in the soundtrack in a sort of non-diegetic sense, as sort of this like ritualistic tribal like chant almost. And then I think about like 20 or 30 episodes later, out of a 50 episode show, you hear this melody as the sort of encryption code, the audible encryption code sort of it's sort of a signature code stamp of the royal family of the moon, which is really interesting because it draws that connection, and this is like diegetic, but it draws that connection between the non-diegetic sort of tribal chant like rendition of that melody earlier in the show, the characters whose ancestors most recently came from the moon, and then the ancient sort of sigil, the audio sigil of the moon's royal family in the story. And then the second example, which I wanted to, and I'll wrap up after this because we're already kind of getting close to the hour mark, but it's the melody which goes by a number of different guises. I don't think it's ever diegetic quite in the sense that like the sort of the other melody becomes diegetic. But it's the melody which it's called Moon in some of its incarnations, and is it actually functions as the second ED of the show, the second ending theme of the show, as the song Tsuki no Mayu, Moon's Cocoon. But it appears in like several guises, and the different sort of orchestrations of the melody sort of underscore different permutations of the way characters are in that scene, or their sort of or the themes of each scene or each circumstance in which the melody appears in the soundtrack. Like for example, there's this sort of pastoral rendition with like little like mandolins and flutes and stuff for a scene in which our protagonist Lauren and his friend Keith are sort of like sitting by the river just conversing. And then there's a very sort of, at the end of the very first episode, there's actually a rendition which is far grander and a lot more sort of, it's bigger, it's a lot more cosmic in scope, I guess one could say. When the protagonist Lauren looks up at the moon and during the nighttime and says, "Hey guys, come down to Earth. It's good." on Earth, and Yasha comes down to Earth, and it's sort of it accompanies a sort of a scene where Lawrence sort of spreads his arms out and sort of yells at the moon, and it's sort of it's just sort of, I mean, this is sort of like a classic example of like a leitmotif kind of thing, but it's sort of the different guises in which it appears are all effective in their own way because of the way that they're presented and the context in which they're presented. Like a melody, a theme, a sort of musical fragment can be really polyvalent, I would say, in its sort of connection. I think, and one actual final thing about this melody, the character of this melody is sort of almost like folk melody like. It has various characteristics, so I don't want to go into a whole bunch of music theory shit here, but it's essentially like it kind of passes for a folk melody, like something that's been like transmitted orally over like generations, as opposed to something that was like, you know, intentionally composed necessarily. So it kind of, the implication to me at least is that like non-diegetically, it is essentially the non-diegetic version of what would diegetically be a folk song. And it kind of fits the sort of like, I would say it kind of fits the themes of the show of like humanity, of like there not actually being any fundamental difference between humanity of different nations of like for the conflict between like the moon people and the earth people. It's like there's not actually any difference between them, and the sort of the folk song nature of it, the sort of the way in which it evokes our sort of like old traditions is kind of emblematic of, I think, the lack of artifice there, and it serves as sort of a conduit whereby the lack of artifice of a lot of the sort of base themes of the story are conveyed. I don't know if this makes any sense at all.
It kind of makes some sense. I'm not super familiar with Gundam in general. I've only really watched Witch from Mercury.
Yeah. And for Turn A Gundam, it's not, I don't really consider it in the context of other Gundam soundtracks, but rather in the context of other Kano soundtracks, because there are certain patterns, and I don't want to go into them.
Because there was something you said that made me think about it, because I don't really know anything about Turn A Gundam, but in Witch from Mercury, there are some pretty significant themes of kind of almost a racism between the folks born on Earth and the folks born in space.
Oh yes, that's like a massive Gundam theme throughout, like from Mobile Suit Gundam 1979 onward, in various permutations.
Yeah, you mentioned like some of the ways you're talking about instrumentation and kind of ways certain things were composed made me think of this is kind of in line with this theme. They're using this to kind of reinforce the internal perceptions of those differences.
Right. There are just so many ways that like soundtracks can contain so many different subtleties, but to discuss that all would need like an entire podcast unto itself, and I don't really want to bore you guys to tears here, and we don't really have all that much time anyway, so
I don't know. That sounds like a fascinating topic to me. So I think this is a good high note to end on.
Yeah. Do we have anything new in the mailbag that we've gotten in the last roughly 2 hours?
Nope. No more mail in the mailbag than the last time I checked. So, if you want to get in touch with us about your favorite examples of music and storytelling, our email address is fanfictapes@gmail.com. You can also leave us a comment on our YouTube channel, or you can leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get this show. We always appreciate that. You can also reach out to us on social media. Right now, we are just on Twitter, formerly X.
Formerly X.
Uh-huh. Maya is in charge of our social meds.
Yes, I am. This is a true statement. Our handle on Twitter is @fanfictiontapes with a capital F and a capital T, no spaces or underscores, none of that weird stuff. We post about episodes sometimes. Hopefully that'll be more regular, as of the airing of this episode, I will be done with undergrad.
Congratulations.
Yay!
More time to do things like this. Which is a lie, 'cause I'm going to grad school. But, anywho.
F.
If you want to hear things about that, go ahead, give us a follow. And our next episode will be about streaming versus theaters. I think that's going to be an interesting one. Elizabeth, before we go, do you have anything you'd like to promote to our listeners?
Sure. I have a, well, I think I'll promote my YouTube channel where I post my fan music. Very relevant to this episode, I would say, because in my Ruby fan songs, I've made use of the Ruby leitmotiva, and I've also tried to sort of make use of musical storytelling devices in general. My channel name is agogobell28. You just search for AGOGOBELL28 on YouTube. And I believe my AO3, my Archive of Our Own account is the same exact thing. Yep, no, yeah, it's agogobell28 on Archive of Our Own. And that's where my fan fictions are. I don't post that often, but sure, you can read some stuff if you like. I've got a couple.
I've heard good things.
Yeah, I've got a Ghost in the Shell one. I've got a Heisei Godzilla one. I'm slowly working on a Turn A Gundam fic. And I'm kind of also thinking I might write a Ruby fic. I'm not entirely sure. I'll talk to you about it afterwards. And then if you want to follow me on Tumblr, I'm Karinta-agogobell-unified tumblr.tumblr.com. That's KARINTA-AGOGOBELL-unified at tumblr.com. I've just posted it in our little text chat because
so we can get links for that, the episode description.
But yeah, I figure if anyone wants to follow me on Tumblr, I don't post on there a whole lot these days, but that's because I'm trying to detox. But yeah, that's all.
Tumblr might be the least toxic social media right now.
That is
that
true.
Doesn't mean that it isn't a cesspit.
That is quite true. It's just it is. It's so much better than Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, but it's still.
But that is only
still
because
Tumblr.
Those other ones have become so much worse.
It's only better by comparison. It's still like a f***ing garbage website in so many ways. But anyway, go follow me if you want. I don't care.
All right. Well, I am and have been Maya, and today I was joined by
Elizabeth. I'm the guest.
And I am Ian. Until next time. Bye.